Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Robin Stamper, the Artistic Director for Opera Tampa, and I'm so very pleased to be here with Melissa Misener, our resident stage director, an amazing performer herself, and our artistic administrator. The first opera of our main stage season, Don Giovanni by Mozart, is often considered by many scholars to be his greatest opera. Now, you can say this about Nozze di Figaro, you can say it about maybe Magic Flute, although I would debate that myself. But what makes Don Giovanni so unique and so great? First of all, it's a story about Don Juan and his falling, because he makes many attempts through the course of the opera for conquest, and he fails at every one of them. He, through the course of the opera, has killed the father of one of his conquests, who comes back to life as a statue and drags him off to hell. Casting Don Giovanni is always a lot of fun because each character requires very specific abilities. In the case of Don Giovanni, obviously he needs to be able to sing well, but he has to be sexy and he has to be a very, very good actor. And our Don Giovanni is Javier Arre, who has actually sung at the Met and has certainly sung the role of Don Giovanni before. What makes Don Giovanni so great is the fact that it incorporates comedy, it incorporates drama, it incorporates the supernatural. But the question is, okay, so Mozart called Don Giovanni an opera buffo, but it's considered by scholars alike to be a dramma giocoso. And I don't know, Melissa, Don Giovanni, is it a comedy or?
That's
is it
interesting.
a
I didn't know
tragedy?
that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that Mozart actually called it a buffo.
Yeah.
That's interesting because there are a lot of comedic elements.
Right, buffo that means comedy. Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, being sort of a studier of commedia dell'arte, of course, I see these commedia characters represented in Mozart's comedy, I guess you could call it. It's sort of interesting when somebody gets dragged down to hell, and that's not usually the funniest thing to happen, but they do sort of sing a moral at the end of it, you know. But yes, the characters are funny. The Donna Anna and Ottavio are definitely our lover characters from Commedia, very over-the-top dramatic, you know, sort of self-absorbed characters that are just over-the-top emotional. And then our Leporello has sort of Arlecchino characters, this sort of sprightly, mischievous sort of servant character, low status, sort of guileless and guiltless. That's sort of our Leporello. Yeah, I guess it's pretty comic. I don't know that does he fail at every conquest, even Zerlina?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
Because when he first encounters Zerlina, so the scene with Zerlina and Mazzetto. Zerlina is just married Mazzetto, and onto the scene walks Don Giovanni. And she's just gotten married, and he actually, because Don Giovanni wasn't just a nobleman who had a lot of power, and a lot of power to be feared by a peasant girl like Zerlina. He also had this mythological power as a lover and a seducer. So he actually wins her over emotionally, and just as he's going off to have his way with her, on comes Donna Elvira, who is the only person in the opera with whom he has had a successful conquest before the opera begins.
I see.
And she intercepts it.
I see.
And he makes another attempt off stage at one of his parties, but once again, it fails. It fails. The only thing that he succeeds at is getting dragged off to hell.
It's the best scene in the show, though, I think.
And it's interesting, you mentioned that Mozart at the ends of a lot of his operas does a moral of the story.
That's right. That's right.
And there's one in Don Giovanni, but it wasn't until the 20th century was that music performed more often. It is very, very popular still to this day to just end the opera with Giovanni getting dragged off to hell, because how important do we really care?
I think we know the moral.
Right, the moral that Elvira goes off and becomes a nun, and that Donna Anna wants to wait one more year before she marries poor Don Ottavio. And Leporello. What happens to these characters? It's a matter of discussions. The music is glorious as to how much the audience cares about them.
Yeah, I'm sad to hear that Elvira becomes a nun. No choices for women.
Oh, but the good news is Zerlina and Mazzetto live happily ever after.
Of course they do.
Actually, in many ways, they're the only character. Well, we care about Leporello, who is a comic character, but at the same time, it's kind of a sad life because he doesn't have any will. He can't function with a will of his own. He has to do everything Don Giovanni tells him to do.
How do we create hell? How do we create hell in our stage?
Well, it can be. We have fire on the stage.
Oh, okay, that's pretty exciting. We don't normally
Yes.
have fire.
Yeah, yes.
That's pretty exciting.
Let's begin with that, and let's leave the rest of it a surprise.
Okay.
So as we discussed, Don Giovanni is both opera seria and opera buffo. The two examples, well actually three examples I'm going to play for you are going to give you the extremities of those emotions. And we begin with the overture, in which Mozart goes all out in a serious way that he does not in any other opera. You can hear the impending doom. And then we go into something fun and lighthearted. Now, for the playful side, giocoso, we actually have an excerpt here from Act 2, Party Scene. And you may or may not recognize this tune. So Mozart is so playful. Actually, what he's doing in the course of Giovanni at this party scene is he's quoting himself, because that is an excerpt from Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro, Non più andrai. And he even makes a joke, Giovanni makes a joke about this little excerpt that Mozart cleverly threw in. To bookend the music from the overture, we actually have the music that introduces the commendatore, the statue, coming back onto the scene and getting ready to drag Don Giovanni off to hell. Now, one of the expansions of this large orchestra is the addition of 3 trombones. Throughout the course of the entire opera, he only uses these 3 trombones 2 times. Once at the graveyard scene, where Leporello and Don Giovanni are actually singing to the statue, and Don Giovanni invites the statue to his party. And 2, in this scene, where you see that the statue accepts the invitation. And on you have this supernatural statue joining the party. Just the same music that you hear in the overture, but with the addition of those 3 trombones. And next, in March, we have the beautiful opera by Engelbert Humperdinck, no, not the famous pop singer from decades ago, a German composer around the same time as Wagner, who put together the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel, but actually eased it up and made it more family friendly. You've heard of the story of Hansel and Gretel through the Grimm fairy tales, and all the Grimm fairy tales are actually quite grim. For instance, in the Grimm's fairy tales, it takes place in medieval Germany, where there was famine, and their stepmother, in this case of the Grimm fairy tale, and convinces the father to abandon the children in the woods. We're a lot more family friendly than that. There are actually gingerbread children, whereas in the Grimm fairy tale, the witch simply cooks children at her whim. And it's really, really a lot more fun, very comic and very beautiful than the Grimm fairy tale. There's really, literally nothing grim about it. So, Melissa, you're our stage director.
That's right. That's right. So I would say the biggest difference between what the Brothers Grimm published in the 1800s and what Humperdinck did, like you say, it's not quite as
Harsh.
Exactly. That's a great word. Yeah. We have the addition of the Sandman, which is like another story that was published around the same time, another myth, who puts the children to sleep. And then we have also the addition of the Dew Fairy, who wakes them up in the morning. And those sweet little characters, and there's 14 angels that gather around the children as they sleep and sort of, invade their dreams. These are all sort of sweet things that Humperdinck added, and it adds a lot of texture to the story, so it's not just this sort of children get abandoned and then bewitched, right? Charmed by this witch and her edible home when they're so hungry. All those things are still present, but it is softened and sweetened a bit.
Well, and in music as well, because the opera was started by Humperdinck actually writing 4 little nursery tunes for a puppet show for his nieces, yes. And he uses these very simple tunes and actually transforms them through the course of the opera. At some point, quite Wagnerian in scope and in harmony. Because, of course, at that time in the late 19th century, everybody was influenced by Wagner. I mean, he was, especially all the German composers. Humperdinck was actually an assistant to Wagner and wrote set-changing music to Parsifal. So the influence is absolutely there in the music, taking a very small little nursery tune and blowing it up. You had mentioned the 14 Angels. It sounds like Lohengrin when we get to that point of the opera.
And it's a big ballet. It's written as a big ballet,
yes.
Which is exciting because we often don't get to have all the art forms together, but this particular opera is a great opportunity to sort of add in the dance element and get really into the fantasy world, which is really fun.
Oh, absolutely, and we're going to be using some special effects, which you can speak to, besides the echoes throughout the theater. But Melissa has this great idea where...
So we're going to be adding some smells into the space to sort of add to that charm effect, that bewitching effect that the children sort of undergo. The witch sort of draws them in. And so I imagine that moment being sort of all sensory. So I thought it was important to add a little bit more sensation for the audience too.
And also, what's very special about this opera is, we have this beautiful Patel Conservatory, and who will be helping us with the not only the dancers, but with the children's chorus. And Hansel and Gretel is the only opera, main stage, very popular opera, where there is no adult chorus. It's all children's chorus. And we will be using children from the Patel Conservatory to make up that chorus as well. You are stage directing our Hansel and Gretel. Is this your first time stage directing it?
Actually, no. My very first stage directing job, I guess you could say, of a full show, right? I had been stage directing concerts and little snippets of opera workshop type stuff. But the very first opera that I ever directed, beginning to end, was Hansel and Gretel at USF. And next year will be exactly 10 years ago. So Yes, so it's hard to believe it's been 10 years since I've been stage directing, and it's hard to believe how many shows I have stage directed since then. But my very first project was Hansel and Gretel at USF, and incidentally, the Hansel who was studying there at USF as a mezzo-soprano, obviously, Sarah Coit, she now has gone on to this very illustrious career in opera. I mean, she's got quite the career, and she'll be coming back as sort of a homecoming to our stage to play Hansel. So it's sort of a homecoming for us, because she was just starting out in her career. Not really, she was still in school, and I was just starting out as a stage director. So so it'll be really fun for us to come back together and do this project together. And I think for the opera-going community to see sort of one of our homegrown opera singers do so well in her career and come back and join us for this project. We're pretty excited about it.
And it's purely coincidental.
Yes.
In casting, I did not seek out a person with these connections. You know, you go for the people who are the most talented, and she's certainly up there.
She certainly is.
As well as our witch.
Yes.
So, audience, if you remember our Cavalleria Rusticana and Gianni Schicchi, you will remember our Santuzza is a lady named Christina Major, who I know quite well. Well, she's so funny. You can go on YouTube and see her singing opera as she's going down water slides. And she makes the most brilliant comic YouTube videos of all sorts of different commentary. Very, very funny lady, and certainly will be a magnificent witch between the voice and the comedy.
She will.
I have another question, though, as stage director.
All right.
So Hansel and Gretel was actually written in German, and Engelbert Humperdinck. We do not perform Hansel and Gretel in German. And incidentally, all of our operas have the titles above them. Even if we're doing something in English, you always have the super titles. But we will be doing Hansel and Gretel in English. Can you speak to our translation?
So our translation is sort of a mishmash of existing translations with sort of my opinion peppered in. So it's going to follow the same sort of format that it does in German, where like a lot of the endings of the phrases rhyme. That's a very stylized thing that Humperdinck has in the opera, and so we want to follow along with that style, but make it accessible to our own audience, both language-wise and just context. You know, understanding time and space. Our now reality, you know, has a different language even than the translation of the Humperdinck from whenever it was published. So it's sort of a mixed bag, let's say, but I'm going to find the most entertaining text for our show.
Well, one of the pieces of good news is that German has similar risings and fallings in the languages, as opposed to French, for instance.
Which is why we can do it in English,
yes,
because it is so sort of similar in syntax.
Syntax, and also, you know, how the language rises and falls.
That's right. So as if it was in Italian, we would be in a mess. Well, yeah, for sure.
French is even worse.
Yeah, French is even worse.
But finding rhymes that actually mean something at least reasonably similar.
Right. Yes.
You know, that's a challenge. It's better you than me, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So I'm excited because we have so many people in our cast that are our local Tampa Bay Area singers.
Oh yeah.
We have
absolutely.
We have several. So actually, the Gretel from that original production that I did in 2014 at USF is actually going to be our Dew Fairy. That's Vanessa Rodriguez, who many people remember her because she's so wonderful and talented in our area. And then, of course, Jordan Blair, who was our Ruth in Pirates of Penzance, and she played in Gianni Schicchi as Nella.
Right.
She
She was in Norma, actually.
She was in Norma as Clotilda,
yeah.
That's right, and she did a couple of different parts in Tales of Kaufman as well.
She was the mother in that too.
She was the mother in that, and she was the mother. I mean, we've used her so many times because we just love her so much.
Mothers, yes.
And it's been so nice and and exciting to watch her develop into the dynamite performer that she is. It feels so great.
And Sean.
And Sean Stork, who was our modern Major General in Pirates of Penzance and was also in Johnny Skiki in that wonderful ensemble.
Yeah.
Yes, and we love using him because he's such a great asset, and I love that we can sort of fish in our own pond here in the Tampa Bay area, that we have so many wonderful singers that are of the caliber that we need them to be for the operas.
Well, it's also good for our artistic community to be employing local singers when appropriate. We've had very great success doing that, and I think it's good for the community, for the local singers to know they will be considered and cast appropriately.
There's work for you here. You don't have to move somewhere else to
get
sing.
work in your hometown.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's really exciting. So we have a cast chock full of local singers, and that's just dynamite.
We're also very excited to be using the Florida Orchestra, and I think of that with Hansel and Gretel a lot. Well, because of the orchestration is so rich. Maestro Francis is conducting our Don Giovanni, and we have an Israeli conductor, Naum Avril. The first time Opera Tampa has hired a female conductor to conduct Hansel and Gretel, and yours truly is conducting La Traviata. When we were speaking of the music of Hansel and Gretel, I mentioned that the opera actually began with 4 little nursery tunes that Humperdinck composed for his niece's little puppet show. Well, one of those tunes is the prayer that you hear Hansel and Gretel singing in the forest as they fall asleep. I also spoke about how Humperdinck was massively influenced, as all composers were in the late 19th century, by Richard Wagner. So you can hear now this lovely little simple tune slowly evolve into something that's a little bit more harmonically and orchestrally expansive. Music starts out very simply. Becomes a little bit more interesting harmonically. Listen to what happens here. That crescendo into a piano dynamic is very emblematic of Wagner and Richard Strauss. The tune gets a little more interesting. That cello line. Now we evolve into the dream sequence in the 14 Angels ballet as the children fall asleep. The little magic. Now we're in a different world entirely. Almost Lohengrin, a Wagner opera. Etc. One of the favorite questions asked by opera conductors and directors and opera lovers in general is, what is your desert island opera? And mine is La Traviata. Why? Because A, the story is so real and so touching. The music is absolutely so beautiful. And I mean, it just reaches in and digs into your heart and rips it out. Not that I desire that on a desert island, but it certainly is gratifying and cathartic in many, many, many ways because it reaches so many different emotions. It's considered one of the middle period operas. Of the famous ones, we have his Rigoletto, Verdi's Rigoletto, Il Trovatore, and Traviata. And one of the things that makes Traviata so real is, A, it is based on a real character, and B, is there's nothing about gypsies or overblown curses or ridiculous situations involving a court jester and his daughter that he keeps in his house, and she unbelievably believes this Duke is a poor student and even loves him after it's been proven that A, he rapes her and he's a scoundrel. It's nothing like that. There are no babies tossed into the fire or anything like that, like in Trovatore. It's all real. It's a situation that actually could happen, did happen, and could happen again today. And one of the great things having Melissa here is Melissa's actually stage direct La Traviata before. So she has a lot of experience with the story. And it's one of those operas where, yes, for every character is important, but in Il Trovatore, there are 4 characters equally important. In La Traviata, not the other characters are not important, but it really revolves around her, all about Violetta.
Yes, Violetta. So the character Violetta is based on a real life person, as you mentioned, Maria Duplessis. And to understand the story, you really have to understand the context, because you have to. She was a courtesan, right, in Paris in the 19th century, and even though it was the underworld of society, it was also the most opulent part of society.
Very glamorous.
It was extremely trend-setting. If a very expensive courtesan were to wear a certain hat with a particular feather, well, then all of the women of decent society would go out then and get a similar hat with that kind of feather in it, because they were what created the trends of the day. And they wouldn't necessarily be, courtesans wouldn't necessarily be invited to tea at anyone's house that was decent, right? And that's the sort of the terms that they would use. But they were the fashion trendsetters. They were the whole opulence of that society at that time is really understated. I mean, you can't express it really. I mean, Marie Duplessis, the actual courtesan that Violetta's character is based on, her weekly flower budget was larger than an average Frenchman's salary.
She must have been good at what she did.
Annual salary. Well, and that's the thing, is that, it wasn't really based on anything particular that she's doing, but instead how much she is worth. And so showing your worth as a courtesan at that time was more important than the actual value of the money. And it was just such an opulent time and space where if I can afford to be seen with this courtesan, then I show my wealth and my power. And so it was very much about showing how powerful and rich the men were by swimming in such opulence.
And yet she's been admired so much by this young man of a reputable family, and he actually convinces her at this party that he's for real and his love for her is for real, and they decide to go out and live in the countryside together. But there's a problem, because his family is reputable. Along comes Papa Germain, and this is one of the most tragic parts of the opera, is watching him finally convince her, even though Alfredo, very well, I mean, what's your opinion here? Do you think that she would have lived longer had she lived the rest of her life with Alfredo, which she doesn't, because Daddy Germain comes and breaks it up?
I mean, I think she knows from the moment that we see her in the opening scene that she's sort of on borrowed time, right? She knows she's got tuberculosis the entire time, whether she shares it with Alfredo, or anyone else for that matter. She sort of has this in the back of her mind all the time. Maybe she would have lived longer had she had him by her side that whole time, but she also kind of sacrifices what is left of her life in order for Alfredo's life to be less tumultuous when it comes to his family. And this is actually mirroring Verdi's life, because Verdi also had a lover who was an opera singer, who had a couple of illegitimate children, some rumored to be Verdi's children, and his father did not like it, and so he was not allowed to marry the woman that he actually loved because of these Victorian era societal norms, which now don't look so normal, that someone would not be able to be seen with someone else because they had a child out of wedlock. That seems sort of absurd to us now, but that was very strict, and that's why it's really important to understand the context, because we don't think it's a big deal nowadays. You can sort of consort with whoever you like, and no one's going to judge you for it. But back then, in that time, I mean, that was serious, very serious to be even seen speaking with somebody who was not reputable, So it's very like life and death situation.
Well, it's interesting also that you point out the similarities in Verdi's own life, because his writing and his lyrical writing in this opera, to me, I find to be some of the most heartfelt music that he ever wrote. So his relationship with the story must have affected his writing.
I think so. So the real life story of Marie Duplessis, there's a novel you can read. It's a short little book, but in the opening passage of that book, it talks about her after she's died, and she sort of died alone in her apartment, and although she was completely alone in her death, when she does die, the book describes a line around the corner of the building where she lived to try to get inside to auction off
her belongings.
bid on her belongings, because that whatever was in there was a fashionable courtesan owned, and so that was something that was very glamorous.
But compared to the opera, in the opera, doesn't she sell all of her stuff?
Yes. Yeah.
Had she not sold it all in the short story?
Yeah, well, whatever was left, they were going to bid on. The difference really between the actual novel about about the actual character and Violetta's story, Verdi sort of puts two characters and makes them one character in the character of Flora, which again is going to be played by our local wonderful mezzo, Jordan Blair.
Yes.
Super exciting. And also at the end of the actual story, the real life story, we don't see the lover and his father come back and be there when she dies. She actually died alone in her apartment.
Yeah.
So that's sort of it's not exactly a happy ending that Verdi put in there, but at least we have some accountability for the suffering at the end, which is something that feels like very vindicating, right?
Exactly.
To see
Germain. See what you did.
Yes, and he's regretful,
Right.
So we get to see this regretful moment on our villain, right? I mean, he's really the villain of the story, which also played by our homegrown Giancarlos Rodriguez, who played our Johnny Skiki last season, or 2 seasons ago, and our Alfio in Cavalleria. So we're super excited about him returning to the stage.
And speaking of casting, Hannah Brahmer. She was the first winner of the D'Angelo competition, which incidentally will occur again in January. She is a marvelous soprano. She have actually covered the role of Violetta in Sarasota, and she sang the most gorgeous audition for me, and we're very, very excited to have her back. Very beautiful soprano.
So this is a role debut for Hannah.
It is.
Lovely.
It is. And she's gorgeous. Her voice is gorgeous. She's a very empathetic person. as well as performer. So
And her
it's-
real-life husband is actually cast in the show, too, isn't he?
He is the Marquis.
Alex Boyd is
Yes.
playing Marquis. Okay,
Yes.
wonderful.
It's all very incestuous.
That's great. They're excited.
There are many, many heart-wrenchingly beautiful melodies in La Traviata. It's why, part of the reason is why it's my desert island opera. None more heart-wrenching than during the course of Act Two, after Violetta has finally decided, through the persuasion of Alfredo's father, Germont, to leave Alfredo. He doesn't know why, Alfredo does not know why, but Violetta sings this powerful goodbye to him. The opera does not end on a happy note, but I'm going to leave you on a happy note and go back to the first act where Violetta and Alfredo are exchanging a toast. It's the Libiamo, one of the most famous excerpts from Traviata. If you ever come to one of our Opera Tampa Singers events, there's a fairly good likelihood that you're going to hear this number, Libiamo. Melissa, thank you so much for joining me here. You are a wealth of knowledge and personality, and it's always a pleasure doing discussions like this with you. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for being with us. We hope our tickets are on sale, by the way. Right now, you can find them at operatampa.org, and we hope to see all of you at the opera.